In the beginning there was silence. Vast, unmeasured. A silence so complete it felt like the absence of sound itself. From that silence two great stories were born, separated by seas and centuries yet bound by the same deep human question. Why does paradise end, and why do we still reach for the forbidden even when we know the cost? One story rose from the sun-baked hills and olive groves of ancient Greece, first shaped into words by a shepherd poet named Hesiod sometime in the 8th century before the Common Era. In his theogony he traced the genealogy of the gods. In Works and Days he turned the same mythic material toward practical wisdom for farmers and brothers. But at the heart of both poems lies a single, devastating sequence: the theft of fire, the creation of the first woman, and the opening of a jar that changed everything. Hesiod called her Pandora, all-gifted, and presented her not as an individual but as archetype, the origin of every woman who would follow, a beautiful calamity sent by Zeus to punish humankind for accepting Prometheus's stolen flame. The other story was born farther east, in the river valleys where the Tigris and Euphrates cradle the land the Hebrews would call Eden. It was written down centuries later, perhaps during the Babylonian exile or shortly after, yet its roots reach back to older oral traditions shared across the Fertile Crescent. In the book we now call Genesis, the tale is simpler in outline but infinite in implication. God forms man from dust, breathes life into him, plants a garden of delight, and then, seeing the man's solitude, takes a rib from his side and builds woman. She is not named until later, when she becomes Eve, because she was the mother of all living. No jar waits in Eden, only a single tree whose fruit carries the knowledge of good and evil. One bite, and the world fractures. Both narratives begin in perfection. For the Greeks, the Golden Age under Kronos was a time when mortals lived like gods, without labor, without old age, without grief. The earth gave fruit freely. Death came gently, like sleep. Then Zeus overthrew his father, the ages darkened, and Prometheus, foreseeing the misery that would follow, gave mortals fire. That gift ended the Golden Age and began the Iron Age of sweat and scarcity. For the Hebrews, Eden was the original sanctuary. Rivers flowed in 4 directions. Every tree was pleasing to the eye and good for food. Animals lived in peace with one another and with humankind. No death shadowed the garden. No thorn marred the soil. God walked there in the cool of the day. Into both paradises curiosity was already woven, a silver thread running through the human soul. In the Greek telling, Hermes deliberately plants restless questioning in Pandora's heart when she is still soft clay on Hephaestus's workbench. It is part of her dowry of gifts, a deliberate spark meant to ignite disaster. In Genesis the curiosity is quieter, almost innocent. God gives the man and woman freedom to name every creature, to tend and keep the garden, to eat from every tree except one. That single prohibition plants the seed of wonder. Why this tree and not the others? What does "you shall surely die" really mean? The command itself invites the question. Neither woman is created as a curse. Pandora is fashioned to restore balance after Prometheus's theft. She is beautiful, intelligent, alluring, the god's masterpiece. Eve is fashioned because it is not good for the man to be alone. She is bone of his bones, flesh of his flesh, partner and equal in dominion over creation. Both enter their worlds as completions, as answers to incompleteness. Pandora arrives at Epimetheus's door with the pit hose resting lightly against her hip. Eve awakens beside Adam and hears him speak her name for the first time. In both stories the divine architects seem to say, here is what was missing. Here is the gift that will make the world whole. Yet the gift is double-edged: curiosity. The same quality that lets Pandora ask why the river curves and why children laugh until her chest aches, is the same quality that draws Eve to stand beneath the tree and listen to the serpent's voice. In both myths the divine does not remove the possibility of transgression. Instead it places the forbidden thing within reach and then steps back. Zeus seals the jar and gives it to Pandora without explanation. God plants the tree in the middle of the garden and speaks only one prohibition. The stage is set. The women are given freedom, beauty, intelligence, companionship, and the one thing that can unravel it all, the capacity to wonder what happens if. This is the universal ache at the heart of both tales. Innocence is luminous, but it is fragile. The quest for more, for understanding, for autonomy, for the taste of what lies beyond the given, often invites the shadow of loss, and once the shadow falls, the world is never again the same. The Golden Age closes. Eden's gate is barred by cherubim and a flaming sword, yet in the ruins a fragile thread remains. In Pandora's jar, one small light trembles at the bottom. In Eden's curse, a promise is spoken that one day the serpent's head will be crushed. The stories diverge in tone and theology. Hesiod's world is harsh, fatalistic. Zeus punishes because he can, and mortals must accept the iron necessity of toil. The Hebrew story is covenantal. God grieves, clothes the man and woman in skins, and hints at future redemption. But the core pattern is identical. A woman reaches, a boundary is crossed, suffering enters, and humanity is forever changed. And so the two first women, fashioned from earth, gifted with breath and wonder, stand at the threshold of their respective paradises. Pandora balances the plain clay jar against her hip and steps across Epimetheus's threshold. Eve walks beside Adam beneath the trees and pauses before the one that was set apart. Both are about to ask the oldest question humanity knows. What happens if I do? The punishment was never meant to be swift or obvious. Zeus understood that true retribution must wear the face of generosity. After Prometheus stole fire and carried it down to earth in a fennel stalk, the king of the gods did not rage across the heavens or hurl thunderbolts until the mountains cracked. He sat on his high throne, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed to storm-grey slits, and let the silence gather until it became a weapon of its own. The immortals felt it first. A tightening in the air, a subtle shift in the golden light that bathed Olympus. One by one they drifted into the great hall, drawn not by herald or decree but by the quiet gravity of Zeus's unspoken will. No laughter rang from the tables. No lyre sang, even as stood still, his spear lowered. Zeus spoke at last, voice low and deliberate, the way a judge pronounces sentence after long deliberation. Prometheus has given mortals the means to rise, he said. He has lifted them one step closer to our estate. For that presumption, balance must be restored. What is given must be matched. What is taken must be paid for in kind. He paused, letting the words settle like dust after a thunderclap. A gift, then, he continued. A gift so beautiful they will embrace it gladly. A gift so complete they will never suspect its purpose until the weight of it crushes them. Let them receive what they have earned, the price of knowing too much, too soon. No one dared interrupt. Apollo kept his fingers quiet on the strings. Athena's grey eyes remained steady, though a shadow passed behind them. Even Hera, ever watchful for threats to her husband's power, merely inclined her head. Zeus turned to Hephaestus. The smith god had already anticipated the command. Earlier that morning he had descended alone to the river that marked the boundary between divine and mortal lands. There, where the current ran silver over smooth stones, he knelt and gathered pale clay, cool, pliant, still carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth and distant mountains. Now, in the forge beneath Olympus, he worked in solitude. The bellows hissed softly. The anvil rang with measured strokes. Red light from the heart of the fire played across his scarred arms. His sweat slicked back, the heavy muscles that had once shaped the very chains that would bind Prometheus. He shaped slowly, reverently, as though the clay were already alive and might protest if handled too roughly. First the torso, a gentle curve to the spine that spoke of both strength and vulnerability, then the shoulders, broad enough to bear burdens, delicate enough to invite protection. The arms flowed long and sure, ending in hands with fingers tapered for precision, capable of threading a needle through silk or gripping a spear shaft, of cradling a child or drawing a bowstring. The legs he formed lithe and balanced, ready to walk both meadow and battlefield without stumbling. The face demanded the longest labor. He sculpted the brow high and thoughtful, as though already accustomed to questions. The cheekbones sharp yet softened at the edges, so that light would catch and linger there, the nose straight and fine, the mouth, full lips that could smile in welcome or tighten in suspicion. He shaped with particular care, tracing the faint line where laughter might one day crease the corners. The eyelids he made heavy-lidded, as though already weighted with contemplation, and the eyes, deep-set. Almond-shaped, he hollowed carefully, leaving sockets that would one day hold light and reflect whatever gazed into them. Love, fear, wonder, betrayal. Form stood complete on the forge floor. It was flawless, more beautiful than any mortal woman yet to be born, more graceful than many of the lesser goddesses. Yet it remained lifeless, a statue of surpassing perfection, waiting for the spark that would make it breathe. One by one the others came. Athena approached first. She placed her palm against the temples and exhaled slowly. Into the cool clay she breathed awareness. The quick, bright flicker of mind that would let this creature learn patterns, ask questions, remember pain and joy alike. The clay seemed to warm slightly beneath her touch, as though intelligence were already kindling inside. Aphrodite came next. She did not hurry. She circled the figure once, twice, studying it with a connoisseur's eye. Then she leaned close, so close her breath stirred the still features, and traced with one fingertip the delicate line of the collarbones, the slender wrists, the soft hollow at the base of the throat. Wherever she touched, an allure took root. Not mere beauty, but gravitational presence. The kind that would make hearts stutter and conversations falter mid-sentence. Even the air around the figure thickened, as though the wind itself paused in reverence. The Graces followed. They moved in a soft chorus, their laughter like distant bells. With ivory combs they parted and dressed the dark hair until it fell in shining waves that caught and held the forge light. They wove tiny blossoms into the strands, myrtle and rose and fragile asphodel, until the hair became a living crown. The hours arrived bearing robes. They draped the figure in shimmering fabric that flowed like water moved by hidden currents. Silk the color of dawn at one moment, twilight at the next. The cloth clung and released in perfect harmony with the body beneath, suggesting both modesty and invitation. Finally Hermes stepped forward. He did not circle or linger. He simply bent to the still ear and whispered, words too soft for any other god to hear. Into the lungs he poured flexible speech, the gift of persuasion, of tone that could soothe or sting, of language that bent to the speaker's will. Into the heart he placed restless curiosity, a hunger not for food or shelter, but for knowing, for uncovering, for asking why and then asking again. It was the same spark that had driven Prometheus to steal fire, now planted in a different vessel. When the last breath entered the clay lungs, the chest rose, once, twice, a third time, deeper, as though tasting air for the first time. Color bloomed beneath the skin, faint rose at the cheeks, faint gold at the eyelids. The fingers flexed once, experimentally. The lips parted in a soft, astonished breath. Her eyes opened, clear, bright, already searching the faces around her, already measuring, already wondering. The gods stepped back. In that moment of perfect stillness, Zeus spoke again. "Pandora," he said. "All gifted." The name settled over her like a mantle. It was not merely a title. It was a sentence. Every gift she had received carried its shadow. Every endowment was also a chain. Before she left Olympus, Zeus prepared the second gift. In the shadowed vaults beneath the throne room, where even the light of Helios dared not linger long, he descended alone. No attendants followed. No lesser gods were summoned. This act required solitude, the kind reserved for judgments that could never be appealed. On a low pedestal of unworked stone stood the P.I.T.A, enormous, broad-shouldered, tall as her waist when she would stand beside it. Its surface was deliberately plain, and glazed clay the color of rain-soaked earth, rough to the touch, unmarked by any sigil, any carving, any flourish that might draw the eye or suggest importance. It looked ordinary. That was the point. A thing so unremarkable would never seem dangerous until it was too late. Zeus circled it once, hands clasped behind his back. Then he raised one palm. From the air itself he drew forth the things that had never before been permitted to touch the mortal world. Things he had held in reserve since the moment the first humans drew breath. He spoke no incantation. He simply named them, and they answered. Fever came first, a burning that would race through the blood like wildfire in dry grass, leaving the body trembling and slick with sweat. Grief followed, heavy as a stone settled permanently in the chest, stealing breath and appetite, turning laughter into something brittle and foreign. Envy arrived next, sharp and green, twisting the mouth into lines of bitterness, making every neighbor's good fortune feel like personal theft. Hunger returned, not the honest hunger of an empty belly after labor, but the gnawing kind that comes again even after feasting, that whispers you will never be full. Labor crept in, the kind that breaks the back without promise of reward, that turns the soil day after day and still leaves the harvest uncertain. Old age slipped through last, quiet as frost creeping into the joints at dawn, stiffening fingers, dimming eyes, reminding the body that time is no longer an ally. One by one they entered the P.I.T.As, intangible yet real, weightless yet crushing. Zeus watched them coil and settle inside like smoke finding its shape. When the last sigh of old age had drifted down into the dark interior, he reached forward and fitted the heavy lid into place. It sealed with a soft, final sound, like the closing of a tomb door that would never again be opened in innocence. He lifted the P.I.T.As then, cradling it as though it weighed nothing, and carried it back up through the winding passages to the bright hall where Pandora waited. The other gods had withdrawn. Only Hermes lingered at a distance, wings folded, expression unreadable. Zeus set the vessel at her feet. "Take this with you," he said simply. "It is part of your dowry." Pandora looked down at the plain clay jar. She ran her fingers along its rough shoulder, feeling the texture of earth that had never known a kill's fire. It felt cool, ordinary, almost comforting. She lifted it, surprised at how light it seemed, and balanced it against her hip. The lid remained firmly seated. Nothing stirred inside, nothing whispered, nothing warned. She turned toward the descending path that would carry her to the mortal world, her new robe shimmering in the Olympian light, her dark hair catching gleams of gold from the sun that never set here. Behind her, Zeus watched her go. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, not cruel, not triumphant, but satisfied. The balance had been struck, fire had been given. Now the price would be collected in installments of sorrow and sweat across generations yet unborn. In Eden, the Creator's design was woven from tenderness rather than retribution. God had formed the man from dust and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. He planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and placed the man there to work it and keep it. Every tree that was pleasant to the sight and good for food grew there. Rivers watered the land. Gold and bdellium and onyx lay in the soil. But the man was alone. None of the animals, though named by him, proved a suitable helper. So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. While he slept, God took one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh. from the rib he built a woman. When the man awoke and saw her, he spoke in wonder and recognition. This at last is bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. They walked together in the garden in the cool of the day. God spoke with them as friend to friend. No fear shadowed their steps. No thorn pricked their feet. The world was whole, and they were its stewards. Yet in the midst of the garden stood two trees set apart from all the others, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God had commanded, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." No jar waited in Eden, only a tree. Its fruit pleasing to the eye, good for food, desirable for gaining wisdom. The prohibition was clear, yet the tree stood in the center, within easy reach. The command itself planted the seed of wonder. Why this tree and not the others? What does "you shall surely die" really mean? The garden was complete, until the possibility of incompleteness was placed within it. In both designs the first gifts are given freely. Fire to mortals, companionship to man. In both designs a second gift, or prohibition, carries the shadow of consequence. Pandora receives a sealed jar without explanation. Eve receives a garden with one tree set apart. Both women are endowed with beauty, intelligence, curiosity, and the freedom to choose. Both are positioned before the forbidden thing. Both are about to ask the oldest question humanity knows. What happens if I do? Pandora stepped from the golden light of Olympus into the softer, dappled world below. The air changed first, thicker, scented with pine resin, wild thyme, and the faint salt of distant sea. Her bare feet met warm earth. Grass bent beneath her weight with a faint, living sigh. She carried the pit hose balanced lightly against her hip, its plain clay cool against her skin, its weight strangely comforting, as though it belonged there. She found Epimetheus at the ragged edge of the first human settlements, in a house built of woven branches and daubed clay that looked more like a nest than a dwelling. He had chosen solitude after the Titan War, not from fear, but from a gentle weariness. Where Prometheus planned 10 steps ahead, Epimetheus preferred to meet the world as it came, one moment at a time. It made him kind. It also made him vulnerable. Prometheus had warned him only once, in the days when fire was still a secret shared between brothers under cover of night. Accept no gift from Zeus, no matter how beautiful the form, no matter how kind the words that offer it. The king of the gods does not give without taking more. Epimetheus had nodded then, serious in the firelight. But memory is a fragile thing when radiance stands at the threshold. One dawn she appeared, tall, poised, the pit hose resting lightly against the curve of her hip. Sunlight caught along her shoulder and made the air around her shimmer, as though she carried a private summer. Her dark hair moved in a soft breeze that touched no one else. Her eyes, clear, curious, already alive with questions, met his without hesitation or coyness. She did not beg entrance. She simply waited, calm and radiant, as though the world had always intended her to stand exactly there. Epimetheus forgot the warning the moment he looked into those eyes. Hospitality, the oldest law of mortals and immortals alike, demanded he open the door. Desire demanded nothing at all. It simply took. He stepped aside. She crossed the threshold with the grace of someone entering her own home. The pit hose she set carefully in the corner near the hearth, where the morning light slanted across its plain clay surface and made it seem almost beautiful in its simplicity. For a season, for a sweet, uncounted stretch of days, nothing terrible happened. They shared meals of roasted grain and wild honey. They walked the meadows together while she learned the names of flowers she had never seen before. Asphodel white as moonlight, poppies blood red against green, irises standing tall like sentinels. She laughed at the clumsy way he tried to weave a crown of grasses for her hair. He marveled at how quickly she learned to speak, to question, to touch the world as though it had been waiting for her hands. She watched women grind grain between stones until flour dusted their arms like snow. She listened to children laugh until the sound ached in her chest with a joy she did not yet understand. She asked questions without shame. Why does the river curve instead of running straight? Why do some plants die when winter comes while others sleep beneath the snow? Why do people smile when they are sad? The answers came slowly, often incomplete, but each one added another thread to the tapestry she was weaving inside herself. Evenings she sat beside the hearth in Epimetheus's house. The fire Prometheus had given burned steadily now, fed by dry wood and careful tending. Its heat wrapped around her like an embrace she had not known she needed. She watched the flames dance, blue at the base, gold at the tips, red in the heart, and felt something stir deep within her, a recognition she could not name. Epimetheus would sit across from her, whittling a spoon or mending a net, content in the companionable silence. Sometimes he told stories of the old days before fire, when nights were long and cold and endless. She listened, head tilted, absorbing every word. And always, in the corner near the hearth, the pit hose waited. It stood exactly where she had first set it down, tall, plain, unremarkable. No glow emanated from its clay sides, no whisper leaked from beneath the lid. It did not shift or creak or call attention to itself in any way. It simply existed, patient as stone, as inevitable as the turning of seasons. In Eden the garden was different, lush, deliberate, every leaf placed with intention. For rivers watered the land. Pishon winding through Havilah where gold lay in the earth, Gihon through Cush, Tigris east of Assyria, Euphrates broad and slow. Trees rose in abundance, fig heavy with sweetness, date palm clustering like jewels, pomegranate bursting with seeds, olive offering both fruit and oil. Every creature lived in peace with every other. The lion lay down beside the lamb, the eagle shared the sky with the dove. No thorn pricked the foot, no sweat fell from the brow. The air carried the scent of myrrh and frankincense, of dew on new leaves. Adam named the animals as they came before him, lion, eagle, serpent, ox, and in naming them he knew them. But none proved a helper fit for him. So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. While he slept, God took one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh. From the rib he built a woman. When Adam awoke and saw her, he spoke in wonder and recognition. This at last is bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. They walked together in the garden in the cool of the day. God spoke with them as friend to friend. They tended the plants, named the creatures, ate from every tree save one. No fear shadowed their steps. No death touched the leaves. The world was whole, and they were its stewards. Yet in the midst of the garden stood two trees set apart from all the others, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God had commanded, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." The tree stood in the center, within easy reach, its fruit pleasing to the eye, good for food, desirable for gaining wisdom. The prohibition was clear, yet the command itself planted the seed of wonder. Why this tree and not the others? What does "you shall surely die" really mean? The garden was complete, until the possibility of incompleteness was placed within it. Then came the whisper. For Pandora, it began quietly. The jar's silence invited questions. She traced its rim with one fingertip, pressed her ear to its side, felt the pull of the unknown. No voice spoke. The urge was internal, planted by Hermes when she was still clay, a hunger to know what lay hidden. In Eden the serpent, craftier than any beast, approached the woman. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? He hissed. She answered, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden." But God said, "You must not eat from the tree in the middle of the garden, or you will die." The serpent smiled. "You will not certainly die, for God knows that when you eat from it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Both confront a forbidden vessel of knowledge. Pandora's jar promises no explicit wisdom, but its mystery mirrors the tree's allure. Good for food, pleasing to the eye, desirable for gaining wisdom. Curiosity, in both, is not vice but a divine endowment turned fateful. Eve sees the fruit's appeal. Pandora feels the jar's invitation. Neither acts in malice, but in the human drive to transcend limits. The stage is set. The women stand before the forbidden thing. Both are about to reach. One ordinary afternoon. No storm split the sky, no raven screamed omen, no sudden wind tore through the thatch roof. She lifted the lid. The moment arrived without drama, without prelude. Epimetheus had gone to the river to check the fish traps he had set at first light. The house stood empty except for the low murmur of the hearth fire and the distant, intermittent laughter of children playing beyond the settlement's edge. Pandora had been sweeping the ash from the stones, gathering the fine grey dust into a small clay bowl she would later scatter in the garden to enrich the soil. Her movements were calm, practiced now, after weeks of repetition. Then, as though drawn by a thread she could not see or name, she set the broom against the wall and walked to the corner. She stood before the pit hose for a long minute, simply looking. The jar had become more than furniture. It had become the still center around which her days quietly revolved. Its plain clay surface caught the slanting light from the open door and held it without giving anything back. She reached out, slowly, deliberately, and rested both palms against the cool shoulder of the vessel. The clay felt alive beneath her fingers, as though it had been waiting for exactly this touch. Her heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with the sharp, bright certainty of something inevitable finally arriving. She lifted the lid. It came away easily, with a soft scrape of clay on clay and a faint exhale of air that smelled of dust and iron and something older, something that had never known sunlight. No dramatic rush followed. No visible cloud billowed forth. What escaped was subtler, more insidious. A pressure change, a shift in the atmosphere itself, as though the room had suddenly remembered it was mortal. Fatigue settled first, subtle as mist drifting in at twilight, sliding into every muscle that had never known weariness before. Her shoulders sagged by the smallest degree. Her arms felt heavier, as though the broom she had set down moments earlier now weighed twice as much. Then came fever, a slow heat rising beneath the skin like cold water poured into warm blood, making her cheeks flush and her temples throb with a dull, unfamiliar ache. Grief followed close behind, unlocking a hollow place behind her breastbone. A sudden, wordless sorrow for things she had never lost, for joy she had only just begun to taste. It sat there, heavy and uninvited, stealing the breath from her lungs even as she tried to draw it in. Envy arrived next, sharpening every glance she cast toward the open door, toward the houses where other women laughed with their children, toward the fields where men worked side by side without the strange new weight she now carried inside her chest. Suspicion took root almost at once, a thin, creeping vine of doubt. Had Epimetheus always spoken so gently, or was there something hidden behind his kindness? Had the children's laughter always carried that faint edge of mockery? Hunger returned, not the clean, honest hunger of an empty belly after a morning's work, but the gnawing kind that arrives even after bread has been broken and shared, that whispers you will never be full again, that no meal will ever quite satisfy. Age whispered last, soft as frost creeping into the joints at dawn. Her knees felt stiff for the first time. Her fingers, once quick and sure, seemed to hesitate before closing. The world did not shatter, it deepened. Pandora stood motionless while the invisible host poured out. She felt each new weight enter the air around her, settle into her lungs, slip behind her eyes, lodge in the marrow of her bones. The room remained exactly as it had been. Sunlight still slanted through the doorway, the fire still crackled softly, the distant laughter still floated on the breeze. Yet everything was irrevocably altered. The colors seemed a shade duller. The warmth of the hearth no longer quite reached her skin. The future, which had felt wide and bright only moments before, now narrowed to a single, uncertain path. When the last sigh had left the jar, when the final, faint pressure had eased, she looked inside. One thing remained. It trembled at the bottom like the last light before full dark. Small, pale, fragile, flickering with a soft, stubborn glow. It did not try to escape. It simply waited, as though it knew it belonged to no one else. She hesitated, only a heartbeat, but long enough to feel the full weight of the choice. Then she pressed the lid back into place. The seal was firm. The jar was quiet once more. Hope stayed trapped. In Eden, the act was quieter still. No jar to lift, only a hand reaching upward. Eve stood beneath a tree in the middle of the garden. The serpent had spoken. His words lingered like smoke. You will not certainly die, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. She looked at the fruit. It was pleasing to the eye, round and smooth, its skin the color of ripe pomegranate, flushed with gold where the sun touched it. It was good for food. Its scent was sweet, promising juice that would burst on the tongue, and it was desirable for gaining wisdom. The serpent's promise echoed inside her. Eyes opened, knowledge gained, likeness to God. She reached. Her fingers closed around the fruit. It came away easily from the branch, as though it had been waiting for her hand. She held it a moment, feeling its weight, its warmth. Then she brought it to her lips and bit. The taste was everything the serpent had implied. Sweetness, sharpness, a sudden rush of clarity. Juice ran down her chin. She chewed slowly and swallowed. Her eyes were open. She looked down at herself and saw nakedness for the first time. Not merely the absence of clothing, but vulnerability, exposure, a body that could be seen, judged, desired, feared. Shame flooded her like cold water. She turned and found Adam standing nearby. Without a word, she held out the fruit. He took it from her hand and ate. His eyes opened too. They looked at each other, really looked, and saw nakedness. They sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves, stitching with trembling fingers. The garden was the same. The rivers still flowed, the trees still bore fruit, but everything had changed. The light fell harsher. The breeze carried a chill it had never held before. They heard God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid. Both acts are irreversible. Pandora unleashes evils into a world that had known only ease. Eve introduces knowledge of good and evil, and with it, shame, fear, separation from God. The jar scatters woes like the fruit spreads moral awareness. Both women become the pivot on which paradise turns to hardship. Yet differences remain. Pandora acts alone, her curiosity unprompted, internal, a spark Hermes deliberately planted. Eve is tempted externally by the serpent's voice, then shares with Adam willingly. Hesiod blames women broadly as a plague. Genesis distributes responsibility. Serpent, Eve, Adam. In one story, the release is passive, inevitable. In the other, it is a deliberate choice. A moral transgression. The jar is resealed, the fruit is eaten and gone, but the consequences pour forth without pause. For Pandora, the world deepened into toil, grief, envy, and age. For Eve, the world fractured into pain, sweat, thorns, and death. Both women stand now in the aftermath. Pandora with her hands still resting on the lid, Eve with fig leaves clutched against her skin, and feel the same quiet, terrible certainty. Nothing will ever be the same. The consequences did not arrive with fanfare. They arrived quietly, persistently, the way dawn creeps over the horizon or frost settles on grass overnight. There was no single cataclysmic moment. No earthquake, no flood, no sudden darkening of the sky. Instead, the world changed. It grew heavier, sharper, more mortal. For Pandora, the reckoning began the instant the lid clicked back into place. She stood in the center of the small house, hands still resting on the cool clay, breathing shallowly. Outside the door, the ordinary sounds continued. Children calling to one another, a dog barking once and then falling silent, the river murmuring its endless song. Inside, everything was different. Fatigue clung to her limbs like a damp cloth. When she bent to pick up the broom she had abandoned earlier, her back protested, a small, unfamiliar twinge that had not been there an hour before. She straightened slowly, pressing a hand to the small of her back, surprised by the ache. She crossed to the hearth and knelt to feed the fire. Her knees creaked faintly, as though the joints had suddenly remembered they were made of bone and sinew rather than divine intent. Epimetheus returned at dusk, carrying a string of fish still glistening from the river. He smiled when he saw her, the same easy, trusting smile he had worn every evening since she arrived. But when he leaned to kiss her cheek, she flinched, only slightly, only for a heartbeat, because a thin thread of suspicion had already taken root. Why does he smile so readily? What does he want from me? The thought shamed her even as it formed, and she pushed it away, ashamed of herself. That night, they ate together as always. The fish were good, grilled over the coals with wild thyme she had gathered earlier. But the meal tasted different. Not worse, exactly, just less satisfying. When the last bite was gone, she still felt a hollow place behind her breastbone, a hunger that food could not touch. Epimetheus noticed her quietness and asked if she was well. She smiled, her lips curving in the way Aphrodite had taught them, and said yes. But the smile felt brittle, like thin ice over deep water. The next morning, she woke with a faint heat in her cheeks, a sluggishness in her blood. Fever, she thought, though she did not yet have the word for it. She rose anyway, swept the hearth, carried water from the stream, ground grain with the other women until flour dusted her arms like snow. Each task took longer than it had before. Each movement cost more. By midday, her temples throbbed, her joints ached, and a great weariness settled over her like a heavy cloak. She did not complain. She had no language yet for what was happening inside her. She only knew that the world had deepened, that joy now carried an aftertaste of sorrow, that every laugh from the children reminded her of something lost, that every shared glance with Epimetheus now held the faint shadow of doubt. Hesiod would later write that Pandora was the origin of the deadly race and tribe of women, a great woe for men who must live with them, who must toil endlessly because of them. He would liken women to drones in a beehive, consuming the labor of others without producing, bringing poverty and endless care into the house. His words were harsh, born of a world that feared what it could not control. Yet even in his bitterness, he captured something true. After Pandora, nothing was. Effortless again. Marriage became necessary but burdensome. Children were born in pain. Harvests demanded sweat. Old age crept in. Death waited at the end of every path. Pandora walked among mortals as witness and participant. She held infants who cried with colic, soothed women laboring in childbirth, and closed the eyes of the dying. She learned grief intimately, not as an abstract weight, but as the hollow ache that follows every goodbye. She learned envy when she saw other couples untouched by the same subtle discord she now felt with Epimetheus. She learned suspicion when small silences grew into questions neither of them dared ask aloud. She never spoke of the jar. No one asked. The thing had happened. The world had grown teeth. That was all. In Eden, the reckoning came with footsteps in the cool of the day. Adam and Eve heard God walking in the garden and hid among the trees. Shame burned in them, new, raw, corrosive. They had sewn fig leaves together, clumsy coverings for bodies that had once been unashamed. Now they crouched behind foliage, hearts pounding, trying to make themselves small. God called, "Where are you?" Adam answered from the shadows, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." God asked, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from?" Adam pointed, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate." God turned to Eve. "What is this you have done?" Eve answered, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." The reckoning unfolded in measured words, curses spoken not in rage, but in sorrowful necessity. To the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." To the man, "Because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." Yet even in judgment, there was mercy. God made garments of skin for the man and his wife and clothed them, covering their nakedness, shielding them from the elements that would now bite harder. He did not strike them dead, though death had entered the world through their choice. Instead, he drove them from the garden, placing cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life, lest they eat from it and live forever in their fallen state. They stepped out into a world that was still beautiful but now hostile. Thorns grew where flowers once bloomed without effort. The ground resisted the hoe. Childbirth would tear and bleed. Desire would twist into power struggles. Sweat would fall like rain, and at the end of every path waited the grave, dust returning to dust. Yet the curse carried a promise, enmity between serpent and woman, between their offspring. One day, a child of the woman would crush the serpent's head, even as the serpent struck his heel. In the moment of expulsion, redemption was already spoken. Both reckonings mark the same turning point. Pandora's jar releases evils that settle into every human life. Eve's bite introduces sin that fractures the harmony between God, humanity, and creation. Toil, pain in childbirth, mortality. The curses echo across both stories. In Hesiod's telling, the tone is fatalistic, almost bitter. Zeus punishes because he can, and mortals must accept the iron necessity of suffering. In Genesis, the tone is sorrowful but covenantal. God grieves, clothes the first couple, and hints at future victory over the serpent. Pandora remains among mortals, carrying the memory of the moment she lifted the lid. Eve steps out of Eden beside Adam, carrying the promise spoken in judgment. Both women become witnesses to a changed world. Pandora watching births in pain and deaths in grief, Eve bearing children in sorrow yet naming her third son Seth, saying, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel." In both stories, the reckoning is not the end. It is the beginning of something harder, deeper, more human. The falls were not endings, they were doorways. Pandora stepped out of the small house at dawn the morning after she lifted the lid. The sky was the same pale blue it had been the day before. The river still sang its quiet song. The children still ran laughing through the grass. Yet every color carried a new undertone, every sound a faint echo of something lost. She walked to the stream to draw water, and when she knelt, the cold bit deeper into her knees than it ever had. She filled the clay jug, lifted it, and felt the familiar weight now laced with a new heaviness in her arms. She carried it back, set it by the hearth, and began the day's work, grinding grain, tending the fire, mending a tear in Epimetheus's cloak. She did not speak of the jar. Epimetheus did not ask. The silence between them was not hostile, only thicker now, threaded with questions neither dared voice. Sometimes, when he smiled at her across the fire, she felt a flicker of the old warmth. Sometimes suspicion rose like smoke, unbidden and bitter. She learned to push it down, to choose kindness instead, though the choice cost her more than it once had. Years passed in the mortal way, slow, inexorable, marked by seasons rather than eternity. Pandora bore children, a daughter first, whose cries in the night tore at her heart in ways she could not explain. Sons later, strong-limbed and curious, who asked the same question she once asked. Childbirth came with pain she had never known before, sharp, tearing, long hours of sweat and fear. But when the first child was laid against her breast, she wept, not only from exhaustion but from a fierce, protective joy that outweighed the suffering. She watched her children grow. She taught them to grind grain, to tend the fire, to weave crowns of wildflowers. She told them stories of a time before, though she could not say whether she remembered Olympus or only dreamed it. When fever came to the settlement one winter, she sat beside the sick, pressing cool cloths to burning foreheads, holding hands that trembled with weakness. When death came, quiet, inevitable, she closed the eyes of the dying and washed their bodies with river water. Grief became her companion, not her enemy. It taught her compassion, taught her to hold others when they could no longer hold themselves. She grew old, her hair silvered, Her hands knotted at the joints, her steps slowed. Epimetheus aged beside her, his easy smile lined now with the same weariness she carried. They never spoke of the jar, yet both knew it had changed them. They never spoke of love, either, not in the grand, singing way the poets would later imagine, but in small, daily acts. A hand offered when knees ached, a blanket pulled higher in the night. A shared silence by the fire that no longer needed words. When she died, it was gentle. She lay on the pallet they had shared for decades, her children and grandchildren around her. Epimetheus held her hand. Her last breath was soft, almost a sigh. They buried her beneath an olive tree she had planted years before, its roots already deep in the earth. On her grave, they placed no marker but a single stone smoothed by the river plain, unadorned, like the pit hose that had waited so long in the corner. The jar remained in the house after her. Epimetheus never opened it again. When he died, the children took it to the river and set it adrift, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the mystery it held. It floated away on the current, carrying whatever still trembled inside. Hope stayed trapped, but perhaps that was mercy. Humanity needed something to reach for, something that could never quite be grasped. Eve stepped out of Eden beside Adam. The skins God had made for them warm against their skin. The garden gate closed behind them with the soft ring of divine finality. Cherubim stood guard, flaming sword turning every way, so that no way back remained. The world beyond was still beautiful, sky wide and blue, grass green underfoot, rivers singing, but it was no longer safe. Thorns grew where flowers had bloomed without effort. The ground resisted the hoe. Seed fell on stone as often as on good soil. Adam toiled from dawn to dusk, sweat running into his eyes, hands blistered and cracked. Eve labored in pain when their first child came. Long hours of agony, fear, and finally the cry of new life. She named him Cain. I have gotten a man, with the help of the Lord, and loved him fiercely, even as she saw the shadow of anger in his eyes. Children followed, Abel, gentle and keeper of sheep, Seth, born after tragedy. When Cain killed Abel in the field, Eve wept until her voice broke. She held the body of her second son and felt grief carve itself into her bones. Yet she bore Seth and said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. In the naming was hope, stubborn, defiant, refusing to let death have the last word. She grew old, her hair grayed, her hands knotted, her steps slowed. She sat with her grandchildren, telling them of a garden where rivers flowed in 4 directions, where trees bore fruit without toil, where God walked in the cool of the day. She told them of the tree, of the serpent, of the choice. She did not hide the pain or the shame. She told them the promise too, enmity between serpent and woman, between their offspring and his. One day, a child of hers would crush the serpent's head. When she died, Adam mourned her beside the grave they dug together. They laid her in the earth she had once tended without sweat. Her children and grandchildren stood around, weeping, yet carrying forward the life she had given them. The line continued, through Seth, through generations yet unborn, carrying the wound of Eden but also the promise spoken in judgment. Both women became ancestors, not in blood alone but in story. Pandora's descendants learned to endure, to plant after drought, to love after betrayal, to rise after falling. They carried the memory of the jar, not as a curse, but as a reminder that suffering is woven into existence, yet so is the small, trembling light that refuses to go out. Eve's descendants learned to hope, to name children after loss and still believe in restoration, to toil and still look for the day when thorns would be no more. They carried the memory of the tree, not as condemnation, but as the place where knowledge entered and with it the possibility of redemption. The legacy is paradoxical. In both stories, the fall is real, suffering is real, death is real, brokenness is real, yet in both, a thread remains. In Pandora's jar, hope stays trapped, perhaps cruelly, perhaps mercifully, allowing humanity to endure what would otherwise destroy it. In Eden's curse, a proto-evangelium is spoken. The serpent will strike the heel, but the woman's offspring will crush his head. Across centuries and cultures, the stories echo. Pandora becomes the Greek archetype of curiosity's cost. Eve becomes the mother of all living and the first sinner. Misogynistic readings cast both as temptresses, sources of ruin. Feminist readings reclaim both as pioneers. Women who dared to reach, who accepted the burden of knowledge, who paid the price so that humanity might grow beyond innocence into wisdom. Yet neither woman is a villain nor a saint. They are human, curious, vulnerable, capable of choice. They reach because they are made to wonder. They fall because freedom includes the possibility of falling. They endure because something, hope in the jar, promise in the garden, refuses to let the story end in darkness. We are their children. We inherit the deepened world. Toil, grief, envy, age, pain in bringing forth life, sweat for bread. We inherit the questions. Why this suffering? Why this longing? Why do we still reach for what we know may wound us? And we inherit the threads. When we plant after drought, when we love after betrayal, when we hold a child born in pain and name it anyway, we carry Pandora's trapped light. When we grieve and still hope, when we toil and still look for redemption, when we name our losses and still believe in victory over the serpent, we carry Eve's promised offspring. The jar still stands in memory's corner, plain, sealed, holding one small flicker. The tree still grows in imagination's garden, guarded, yet whispering of a day when the sword will be sheathed and the gate reopened. And somewhere between the trapped hope and the promised Redeemer, humanity continues, falling, rising, reaching, hoping anyway. Because the falls were not endings. They were beginnings.